I think we got the right host to talk about resistance.
I'm trying to,
and I'm being funny.
Well, I'm trying to not be personally attacked by just kidding.
No, it's truly, Becky, and I mean that. I'm very excited about today, but truly, in my opinion, one of your most endearing and yet effective traits as a leader is your ability to take resistance and make something positive out of it. And so Jake probably knew that and scheduled that, but I sit here and looked at this and listened to this and went, I think it's one of the things that really makes us effective is our ability to take resistance. So I'm looking forward rather to our time together today.
Me too. And I would say you and I are wired very similarly in that aspect, that a lot of times we look at those things as a challenge. And I think it's easy when problems occur or resistance happens. Maybe we're wired one of two ways. Either we look at it like an opportunity to step up and be challenged and take it on, kind of like a competitive game that you would play. And others of us use it as almost a way to handicap ourselves. We kind of use it as a hurdle or a way that we feel like it's an obstacle instead of a challenge. And so I think all of these things come back to us relearning and understanding ourselves and the appropriate ways to approach those things. I love that John categorizes those things as, the percentages of those that are resistant and those that people sit on the fence and those that just accept change and run with it. Where would you categorize yourself? I would say the majority of the time.
So it's so interesting. Recently, I think that I like change. I like things that cause me to sharpen myself. I love to see myself as being coachable, teachable, and I think the only way you can get those kind of things is through resistance. So I think I like resistance, but it's very interesting. I want to say this on the onset because I believe that the lack of resistance or the running away from resistance is probably the single greatest limiting factor to people that want better things but are not willing to embrace resistance to get them. So let me say that right there because John says, hey, expect resistance. That's his first point. Going back to your question though, Stephanie, my wife and I were talking recently about does she think I like conflict? And I think in a lot of ways that conflict and resistance are at least cousins, if not many times the same thing, the same immediate family. And she says, you know what? I think you like control. And on times that you can handle control, you embrace resistance or conflict. But on the times you start losing control, I think you don't want conflict or resistance at that point. And I thought, wow, that's incredibly insightful if Stephanie's right. I haven't given her credit yet that she's right, but I am at least thinking about it to the point I'm putting it out in podcast land, is do we, as leaders, do we accept resistance as long as we can keep control? And when resistance or conflict begins to cause us to lose control, we shut it down. And I don't have an answer on that yet for me, but I have a real intrigue to say, I believe I do like resistance or conflict. But I'm wondering if I like it within a controlled environment. And is that really resistance, right?
Not really. I mean, I think it goes back to all of us are comfortable in our strengths. And so for you and I that are comfortable with conflict or resistance, it's still in our comfort zone. And so for everyone that's not wired that same way, it definitely can cause some stress or even anxiety at times. For many years being in sales, I had a mentor actually teach me this same concept, but he used it in apples, which for anybody that loves a visual, this works really well, where people are either red, green, and this sounds harsh, or rotten apples. And I'll get to why it's not so harsh, because red apples are those that just, again, embrace change. They want to be a part of growth. They love the challenge. They're up for those things. The green apples are those that they need questions and they have a process. So if the change doesn't happen within their process, that's where you get the resistance. Or maybe they just need time to go through the process. Some of us are willing to leap before we look, and some of us have to have all the numbers work out before they do. But the rotten apples, there are those that you could be curing cancer. They don't want to know about it. And mainly it's not because they're bad people. It's just that means they're really going to have to do something about it. When they know better, they have to do better. And so sometimes your resistance to even knowing, because it's going to force you into change or progress, or it's going to cause ripple effects, it's easy to do that. But he said it's easy when you can recognize people in those categories to know how to handle it. So those that just become so resistant they can't move, it's not that you look or think less of them, you just move on and let them go through a process by themselves. You know, you would never pick up an apple in the store that was rotting and try to love on it so much that it changes. But we do that. If you're a nurturer too, or like control, like we do, we try to change people. So I love the fact that it gives you permission to let people be and process how they want to, but not to slow down the growth or the progress at the same time, which I think is, again, easier said than done.
Yeah. I think when we build around us, I used to call people around me that I intentionally put around me contrarians. I need people that I have a strong personality. I know that's probably a surprise to you, Becky, but I'm pretty strong, opinionated, pretty driven. And I have found that when you have several of those leadership characteristics, that it gets really easy and much more easier, I guess, is the best word to use, for people around you to just kind of be agreeable. Yep, that's good. It'll work out. Let's go. But I've also found that's not how you get the best idea. And so for years, I would try to find at least one or a few contrarians to put on my team so that I would get a different perspective. My strength became a minimizer. My passion became a limiting factor when it came out as intensity. So what I was discovering, even as John was talking, is that contrarian really is meant to give that resistance or that other perspective to make a leader sharper. And what happened when I get a contrarian around me, two things I think are the biggest takeaways. One, I typically will see a better point of view, a better vision, a better idea, because somebody around me is making me see something from a different perspective. But here's the other thing that I love to get, is it makes me sharper in how I communicate my vision or my direction. Because I know that contrarian is not going to let me just get by with just convincing people with my emotion or my passion. The words, the strategy, the structure, the plan is going to have more validity, because the contrarian is going to bring that level of resistance. And that resistance makes me sharper as I prepare, as I present, and then as we pursue the plan. There is a greater degree of effectiveness because of that resistance in one's leadership or on one's leadership team.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think when John brings it back to the point of having a clear target, it helps bring us back to that point, as far as realizing sometimes we dilute the message and people aren't able to see the gold at the end of the rainbow. Like, we haven't created that. I know you and I have these conversations too, where we create resistance for each other or pushback. And, we had a conversation the other day where you even said, well, then I'm still not clear with my vision. And I realized, you know what? It's so true. And it's not that I don't see it or we're not excited about it. It's just sometimes we all have our own thoughts. And so it's very easy to get off track, especially if you're a creator, like you like to create things. So having that vision retold over and over again is not only one of your great strengths, but I think as a leader, we have to create that as a strength, even if it doesn't come naturally.
I want to dig into that a little bit, Becky. I didn't even think about that as I was listening, but just as you brought that, I remember that conversation you're referencing. And what I love about you is 30 minutes later, we're texting each other about something unrelated, but it doesn't change our relational connectivity at all. But I remember that comment that you were giving me something that was a really good idea, but from my vantage point, it took us off point from the vision that I had laid out. And so we bantered about it 2 or 3 times. We even had a couple of referees, other people in the room with us or in the conversation with us. And they would give a vantage point that would help me see you a little bit more and perhaps gave you a vantage point that you'd let me see a little bit more. And at the end, I remember as a leader, I pulled the trump card, right? There's only one card that can be pulled in a setting like this, which is, hey, there's only one of us that's a visionary. And you're off point from the vision. Well, what do you say as a leader to that when your leader pulls the trump card, right? I remember you coming back and saying, well, I don't think it is a vision adjustment. I think it's right in line with the vision. So you're pulling the trump card, Mark, but let me come back with a little bit more resistance and tell you that this is how I am seeing it. And I went, well, maybe I'm just not giving the vision clear enough. Well, here's what I want to pull out of that, Becky. The great takeaway for me from that meeting was I need to do a better job of communicating, and sometimes communicating the vision is not telling it, it's listening for it. And I went, you know what I've got to do? I've got to let Becky regurgitate back to me what she's hearing when I give a vision comment. I bet you your takeaway was probably, I got to do a better job when I'm presenting an opportunity like this of linking it to the vision that I'm hearing Mark say. You're a brilliant leader, Becky. You're competent. You've succeeded so many times in so many areas I've never succeeded. We make a brilliant team. When you come to an impasse because of conflict or resistance, everyone needs to come to the table saying, what can I learn from this to make me more effective down the road? For me, it was clarify the vision, but not by talking more, talk less, and let Becky speak back the vision. In subsequent conversations, your takeaway in that particular issue was, hey, I need to do a better job of linking my ideas, this opportunity, to the vision that I already know what Mark is wanting right here. My challenge to us as leaders when John says, explain the rationale for change, or when he says, provide a clear target, which is 3 and 4 in our notes that we're all looking at when John's teaching, is us as leaders do not need to look to eradicate resistance. We need to look for ways to make that resistance yield a stronger leadership team, a greater resolve in the leader or the leadership team, and a way for that resistance to take us faster. Because just like a sailboat, if you can set the cast, if you can set the sail to take the wind, the resistance, that's the faster the vessel's going to go. And if you and I, as co-leaders, Becky, will look for ways to take resistance and yield exactly that, strength, we're stronger because of it. Clarity, we're more clear and effective because of it, are faster. We've learned to set the resistance, to set the sail and to go faster. Then resistance actually becomes something we long for on teams rather than we try to eliminate on teams.
I agree. And I think sometimes you and I make people nervous around us because it does sound disruptive sometimes. I think for people that might not have that foundation that you and I do as far as mutual vision and mutual respect. And we just really love each other's company, but we also understand that that's how we grow. And, my husband can attest to that as well. There's been 29 years of just a few disagreements, but we always come back stronger together. And a lot of times the disagreement isn't even on the vision. It's just communicating the process. And I think that's where you can't substitute time with people. And I love, even in other lessons that John's talked about, mentoring, you can't mentor someone, one that you don't necessarily like personally, but you also can't mentor someone you don't spend time with. I mean, it requires amount of time. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with just being able to communicate not just the end goal and the vision, but the processes around it. And I've said this to you before, especially launching new initiatives. My greatest fear is that I start running and I'm running in the wrong direction. And so when we all come together, I love our lead team meetings. I love all of our events. I love all of our calls because it really helps us all just align, and we're just all so much stronger together.
Well, I want to catch this. I want to catch this. Sometimes differences in language and communication can manifest itself as
Hmm.
resistance. And I think it's really important for leadership teams. I love that statement. I think it's important for leadership teams to identify what is resistance. In fact, I remember a conversation you and I, Becky, we had, and I was giving you the positives. I was giving you the positivity sandwich. The bread is the positive. The meat is really what I want to say. Becky, you're doing such a great job. Man, you failed miserably that last time. Becky, I'm so glad you're on the team. I mean, that's an example, okay? So we put that positivity sandwich on it. And one time I was giving you the front end positivity, and you said, Mark, can we cut to the chase and just get to the things you want to really say right here? And I started laughing because I was going to get to the things I wanted to say, but I was treating you the way I would treat the person down the road. They need to hear positivity. They need to hear something that would sandwich what you're really wanting to say from a critiquing standpoint. I want to take that a step further. I'm working with one of our teammates right now that's helping me in some of my areas. I have found that you not only need to identify what is resistance as a team, what's the rules of engagement around resistance. You need to also understand when and how you want resistance in certain areas of your life, in certain areas of your leadership. I'm telling a leader currently, hey, in this area, I need you to be a little more positive on the things I did right before you give me the critique on the things I can do to get better. Here's why. I'm not as confident in that area as I am in other areas. And so I gave this universal thought, hey, in this area, give me the resistance after you tell me 2 or 3 things that you've done right, because I'm not super secure in this area. It's outside of my skill set, but I'm needing to develop it to make my leadership more well-rounded. And it was a wonderful conversation. In fact, the leader said, that's so good, thank you. Well, then I noticed he started doing it in another area to where I don't need the positivity. I'm super comfortable there. Don't give me all the positivity. Let's save some time and get to the critique, please, because I'm ready to go. And I watched this leader, who is a developing leader, go, wow. And I can only imagine they're going, is this Jackal or Hyde I'm dealing with? Which guy am I dealing with here? But really, it's important. And let me say why I even illustrated that. It's important in leadership teams that you don't allow resistance to cause conflict that is irreparable. That's not smart leadership. You need to allow resistance to be an accelerator of trust, not a distraction from congruency. And that's a leader's responsibility, because I've seen resistance that can build trust or tear trust down. What kind of leader are you going to be, podcast listener? Are you going to be you're going to have resistance. John said it. It's his first point. Expect resistance. Now that we've got that out of the way, you're going to have resistance. What you going to do with it? Are you going to let it build trust? Are you going to let it tear trust and congruency and collaboration down? The best way I know to let resistance make an environment better, build trust, is to, one, agree with what is resistance. With you, Becky, I can go, Becky, come on. With another leader on our team, if I just use that tone, they wilt. They're done. So you got to identify what the resistance is, and then you got to put rules of engagement around how we're going to make resistance build trust. That's why, and I'm going to come back and let you say something, Becky, because I can tell you want to, and I'm ready for you to. But that's why we've called this a series. We're going to spend 2 weeks. John did 6 today. We're going to do 7 more next week, because resistance is that important. It's going to happen. But is it going to be effective or detrimental to your organization? Becky?
Yeah, no, I just think it's so important what you said of understanding in our own leadership that it's a sign of our maturity or immaturity, how we adjust our communication in that resistance moment. Because I think it's very easy for us, especially when we own the vision, to decide that we're going to communicate it the way we want to communicate it. But the fact that in number 6, John lays out the positives and the negatives, you're reading, I'm literally sitting here looking at others will feel important, new ideas will surface, and all of these things sound so great. And then it gets to the bad news, the progress will be slower and decisions can be diluted. And I immediately are like, No, that's where the resistance comes in.
I don't want that.
Right?
Hey, I resist
Yes,
that.
I'm resisting that part because that's in my nature, is just to run, run, run. And sometimes when we are running too fast, we're not bringing the right people along with us. And we need those people to grab that vision. So I think what you just said, as far as understanding that we, even in our very, very secure moments, have insecure parts of our leadership, and being just as conscious of those two helps us adapt, so that we're not resistant to even the slower movement or diluting the progress, because those things just hurt my head thinking about them. Like, how do we avoid that? And there's just no way to avoid those things.
There's a difference. You see, nothing is great until a life is changed. You do understand that. So you can have a good conference. You can't have a great conference. Great is only what they do with it after the conference. You can have a good book, but the book becomes great when it changes the life. And so many times we count our victories before we have victories. We count our victories because we just looked good when we walked across the stage. And everybody clapped and everybody was happy, and we thought, oh my gosh, what a good conference. Everything escalates and gets better when the people get better. And if the people don't get better, it wasn't that good. And if the people don't change, if the people don't grow, and if the people just aren't reproducing, it never becomes great. See, leaders understand greatness begins with them and what they teach and inspire their people to be and do. But the result of greatness is in the proof of the people. It's in the people. So if you say, well, I'm a great leader, well, how many great leaders have you reproduced? So you're not a great leader because you have followers. You're a great leader because you've reproduced leaders. And so this is going to be a huge day. I promise you, you're going to fill pages of notes. Not just a page or two. I don't know who does that, but you're going to fill pages of notes. You're going to have to you're going to have to go straight from here to a massage therapist. You're going to say, just work the hand, work the hand. We just work the hand. I've been taking a lot of notes because one of the things we do in the John Maxwell Company, it's a reputation of mine to give you more than you can handle. You with me? Do you ever go to hear somebody speak and you just kind of sit there for a while and kind of hope for a miracle? You know what I mean? You just say, I know it will sometime get better. And you know, and have you ever sometimes kind of want to just walk up and say, you know what, you're not very good. Let me give you a couple thoughts here. Just say these, it'll help you. It'll take you to a new level, huh? Now, the reason I say that is we work very hard. You're here by invitation. I mean, we do these things quite a bit. We've got to pack this thing out many, many times. But we just said, no, we want the right people in the room. When we want the right people in the room because then it reproduces itself. So I've worked hard. I'm going to do the laws of growth. I'm curious, how many of you have the book, 15 Laws of Growth? Raise your hand. Oh, look at that. Yeah, that's good. That's really good. That's very good. You notice I didn't ask how many of you had read it? I'm delighted today to talk to you about some of the laws of leadership. And the first one I want to talk to you about is truly the first one I should talk to you about. Now, there are 15 of them, but you have to understand there's one that I think is foundational for the other 14. Not more important, but foundational, and that's the law of intentionality. And that's where we're going to begin today. The law of intentionality just basically says growth is the only guarantee that tomorrow is going to get better. Oh, isn't that good? If you're going to grow, and if I'm going to grow, we're going to grow intentionally. Now, I'm talking to leaders today. I love talking to people that lead many people. And to be honest with you, if I could just literally come off the stage and I could get real close to you and we could have kind of like a one-on-one conversation. There are two questions that I would ask you, and the two questions I'm about to ask you will really determine how successful you're going to be in this business, without any question. These are the two questions. It's not like there's 3 or there's 4 or there's 7. There's 2, okay? Just trust me on this. I'm an old man. I know this. I've been around the block a few times. And there are 2 questions that if you can answer in a positive way about yourself, you're going to be very successful. And if you really cannot answer that in a positive way, to be honest with you, you're not going to be near as successful as you would like to be. The first question is very simple. What are you doing to develop yourself? And if you'd say, my gosh, John, I'll tell you right now, I'm doing a lot to develop myself. I've got a personal growth plan, and I'm intentional in this, and I'm doing this on a daily deal. If you could say that to me, then I'd say, hey, we're in good shape here. We're in good shape, because that's the key. What are you doing to develop yourself? And by the way, the reason that's first is not because you want to be selfish. It's kind of like almost a selfish question. The person says, well, why do I start with myself? The reason you start with yourself is because you cannot give what you do not have. So you better start with yourself. Because if you're leading others and have nothing to give them, nothing to share with them, nothing to teach them, then I can promise you, you'll never be what you want to be as a leader. And I can promise you that after 40 years of personal growth, the secret of any success, if I've had any success at all, the secret of that success has been personal growth in my life. And growth has literally placed me where I am. So what are you doing to develop yourself? It's a huge question. And the 15 laws of the 15 laws of personal growth, basically these laws are all about developing yourself and developing the second question, what are you doing to develop others? You see, on the first question, you're foundational for your future. The second question is all about compounding, multiplication. That's where you build a huge business, when you know how to develop other people. And what we have to understand about the law of intentionality is that you cannot develop yourself and you cannot develop your people unless you're intentional. And I discovered that in my 20s when I sat down and had breakfast with a guy named Kirk Kampmeyer at the Holiday Inn in Lancaster, Ohio, and he asked me the question, John, do you have a plan for personal growth in your life? Didn't have a plan. Didn't know I was supposed to have a plan. Nobody ever told me I was supposed to have a plan. I graduated. I was working hard, doing my very best to reach my potential. But nobody ever walked in my life until Kirk Kampmeyer did and said, John, do you have a plan for personal growth in your life? And I didn't have one. I was embarrassed. I thought back then I had to have answers. And so I acted as if I did, and that didn't really work very long. I was kind of like a plane circling an airfield trying to come in for a landing. Found I just shut up and landed that plane. And he looked at me, and I'll never forget, he said, you don't have a plan, do you? And I said, no, I don't have a plan. And then he said to me, John, growth is not automatic. If you're going to have to grow, you're going to have to grow on purpose. That day, my life was changed. What Kurt was saying is, if you're going to grow, you have to be intentional. I mean, it starts with me. So look at the person you're seated beside and just say to them, this will kind of be like a get acquainted time with him. Just look at him and say, you really need to improve. Go ahead and tell them that, right? You really need. Now, wasn't that fun? Wasn't that fun? Isn't it fun to just look at somebody and say, you know what, you really need to improve? Yeah, it just rolls naturally off the tongue. Now look right back at him and say, I need to improve. Now you said that with a lot less enthusiasm. I mean, did you hear that? I mean, when I said, tell the other person you need to improve, I mean, it was loud. You need to improve. Yeah, well, yeah. I need to improve. Yeah, I need to improve. Now, the problem is we have what I call growth gaps. The reason that we're not intentional in our growing is there are just some gaps that keep us from getting to where we need to go. And I'm going to give you about a half a dozen of them really quickly. The first one is the assumption gap. And the assumption gap just basically says, I assume that I'll grow automatically. You see, most people, they live by assumption. 99% of people today are assuming, just assuming, that somehow they'll get better. Very sad, folks, very sad. Because let me tell you something about assumption. Assumption is a huge disappointment in life. You show me a person that assumes, and I'll show you a person that almost daily is disappointed. So, the first gap is a gap that leaves many people short, and that's just the pure assumption gap. The second one is the knowledge gap. And the knowledge gap is basically, I don't know how to grow. And we've all been there. In other words, okay, I know that I need to be intentional in my growth, but I really don't know how to grow. I've been there. Now, I brought something with me today that's very special. It's a kit, and I'm just so pleased to have this because this kit is very important to me. Now it cost me $799, and I got this kit. I got this kit back in the 1970s. Okay, and this was my first personal growth kit. It's Dynamics of Personal Goal Setting by Paul Meyer, Personal Success Planner, and I was so excited. It cost $799. Now you have to understand, I made about $800 a month. So get the picture. It took me 6 months to buy this kit. I saved up. We didn't have credit cards back then, and I just saved up and worked hard. And it took me 6 months before I had enough cash to buy this kit. And I was so excited when I got it. And I mean, I opened it all up, and this is just amazing. You'll just see some things here that just crack you up. It had, for some of you young people, you've never seen this before. They're called cassette tapes. And I remember taking the first cassette tape out, putting it on my little cassette player, opening this up. Oh my gosh, this was so wonderful. That wasn't. They had page by page plans. I go through the plans and listen to the tapes and go through the plans, listen to the tape, go to the plans, listen to the tape. This was my first growth experience. And the ROI on this $799 kit, it's worth millions of dollars to me. Yeah, you heard me right. Millions of dollars. And experiences and a lifetime of growth. And what's interesting is, now here's what I want you to hear. The value of this kit, the content was good, but that wasn't the value. The content was good. But as I look back now, I say, what made this so special? What made this so special is very simple. This is the kit that got me started. Hear me out. The value of what you do for people is not so much what you give to them as much as it challenges them to get started. Getting started is absolutely the key to life. And by the time I finished going through this personal growth kit, by the time that was all finished, I had 6 months of day in, day out personal growth. And what it did is it developed a habit in my life. And by the time I finished with that kit, now I'm used to spending time every day in personal growth. It got me started. I mean, this is worth this whole lesson if you can just get this. The reason I'm so passionate about personal growth is personal growth keeps me prepared. In other words, if I'm continually growing, I continue developing myself, and I'm continually learning, and I'm continually doing new things and going to another step higher, can I tell you what that is? That constant growth is the preparation for the opportunity. So when the opportunity comes, here's the way. You don't go into an opportunity, you grow into an opportunity. And so I'm passionate about personal growth because for that person who says, wow, I had an opportunity, I wasn't ready. If you're growing, you're always ready. Because after I intentionally started growing, I made a commitment to grow as a leader. I started writing, I became an author. I developed growth resources for other people. I founded my first company. I began training conferences. Everything I can think of that has ever been good in my life was a result of the fact that I started personal growth in my life. I know I'm known for leadership. I understand that. But my passion in life, more than anything else, is personal growth. Because if you grow personally, you can be a great leader. But if you don't grow personally, you can't be a good leader. Everything in life that you're ever going to want is based upon your ability to develop yourself. So Kurt Kampmeyer said, John, you can't just accidentally grow. You got to grow on purpose. And so I started. And I got to thinking yesterday when I was getting ready to, kind of my last preparation for this lesson, I got started. And guess what? When I got started, let me tell you what I didn't have. I didn't have experience. I didn't have knowledge. I did not have a model. I did not have a mentor. I did not have a plan. I did not have a fellow traveler. I did not have resources. I did not have money. I did not have a growth environment. But I got started. You don't stop or not start because of what you don't have. You don't start because you don't realize yet that the fruit of everything good in life begins with a challenge. There's nothing easy in life, worthwhile in life. Everything is uphill that's worthwhile. And it's not going to come to you, and it's not going to fall in your lap, and it's not going to be something that, oh my gosh, it just was so simple. It's always going to be difficult.
Yeah, let me say this. I can't remember who I learned this from. It may have been Andy Stanley. We've said this before, where your team, right? Yeah, your team doesn't necessarily care at times what you say. They just need to hear your voice. That was really during the pandemic that I think Andy was brilliant on. But it may have come from something I learned from him where he said, make this statement. This is what I know as of today. This is what I'm 100% sure about today. Mm-hmm. You don't have to guess about what it's going to look like and be transparent about what maybe your thoughts are, what the leadership team's thinking about, or like, this is what I know today. This is what we're responsible for. This is what we can build off of. And so use that statement. And that will begin to show that you are being transparent with the information that you know that is for sure today.
I have a situation that came up on a call. The leader said that, and it was related to generational again, that the younger generation being very transparent about their salaries. And they were sharing openly with each other and collecting, kind of a spreadsheet type thing, collecting everybody's salary. And it was causing some churn on the team. Those that, made more were feeling pretty good about themselves. Those that made less were not. And a lot of questions about why does that person make more than me? And this transparency was causing the leader wasn't being transparent about the salaries. The people took it on themselves
with each other
to be transparent about their salaries. And the dynamic, and I thought about it from a generational point of view, that, a baby boomer, mortified. We would never do that.
When you said churn, my stomach's over here churning right now thinking about this.
You're an X.
And I'm an X.
X would say what? They did what?
That's right.
But then you think Gen Y, millennial, kind of, well, whatever. And then Z is kind of saying, heck yeah, buckle up, buttercup. Here it comes. We're going to share everything we got.
That's right.
And so what's a leader to do in that situation? And I asked this person, I said, it's a coaching call. So I said, what do you think about that? What do you do about that? And he said, well, I wanted to fire him. I said, for sharing information, you're not allowed to do that. I thought, well, wait a minute. You need to check the National Labor Relations Board rules. There are laws, and they can share that. That's not illegal to do that.
Yeah.
It's in the United States. If you're listening outside the United States, I don't know. But but yet here you can talk about things like that. So I'm wondering, if you think about the leader wants to be transparent, and let's just talk about salaries. And if that's going to be a trend going forward, if people are going to do more of that, what do you do with that? And how do you handle that?
When you shared this with me, I began thinking, wow, that's interesting. And I can begin to comprehend that as we are moving forward with different generations and the conversations that come up inside of teams, I go, okay, maybe I could see that. Definitely different than when we were coming up, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean it's different. So I started to do a little bit of digging, a little bit of looking, and I want to bring some percentages to this. I haven't shared this with you either, but I haven't been very transparent prior to this meeting.
I'm really shining a light on some things here today.
So I was like, man, okay, so this was on a coaching call for you. So this is a real thing. It's really, really happening. And then tying it to Tim's conversation, I was like, I got to do a little bit of looking into this. So I found a couple of percentages that I thought that would be interesting for our listeners with coworkers that have shared, similar to the situation you've talked about, that have shared openly with their compensation. Now, what's ironic about what you just shared with these statistics is as I'm going to share them, you're going to see the statistics continuing to go up of more people that are sharing this. So 31% of the survey that I read, 31% of the Gen Xers said that they have actually shared some private information about their benefits with
Gen X.
The Gen X.
Okay,
yeah. Then Gen Y, our millennials, 40% of them. So we've gone from up 9% from different generations have shared their benefits package information about their work with their organization. And then Gen Z is up another 2%. It's 42% have shared. And so you see the trend on where it's going. And that's, as I was reading the data, that's the last benchmark that they've had. And so when you look at this, you go, okay, it's going to continually increase. So how do we go about this? Because if we don't have some type of structure around it, it is not healthy for organizational culture, to your point. Well, it doesn't matter what side of the scale you're going to be on, it is not going to be something that enhances the engagement level of the team and of the organization. It's going to be troublesome. You're going to have jealousy. You're going to have inequity among coworkers. And so most of the people would be that are not in charge of placing those benefit packages in front of our team. Most of the people, they make a lot of assumptions. They really don't know what the difference is in education, in certifications, that their experience, their training. They don't know all the details that an organization has looked into as they hired someone that has come along. And so we've got to be very intentional as we're thinking about this, whether this is you as a leader, whether this is the HR department, whose ever responsibility it is inside your organization. We have to be intentional about having a compensation strategy.
That's it right there.
Right? Like we have to have, if you don't have that, you're going to have a lot of ums and wells and, and there's going to be a lot of what I call at times the gap of wonder. When people are just wondering why, Perry is being compensated this and Chris is being compensated that. What do? They put a negative spin in their mind about why that gap's there compared to kind of maybe what the benefits package that they're receiving. And so I think if you have a strategy so that when you begin to initiate the compensation, the benefits package of why, then you have something to stand on. And that is something that also you can explain to not only the individual, but then if someone else comes to the leader or the HR and they want to know, hey, how are decisions made around compensation? What does this look like? Is it tied to the job description? You have something as a framework to stand on and point to, and then it becomes very clear.
All right. Well, I worked for IBM for a number of years, as known, and they went to I was a leader there, and I had to give raises and defend compensation and payments and rewards and commissions and all that kind of stuff. One thing they had gone to was to your point, to really not just having whatever salary when you offer, you actually had a plan, a compensation strategy for every role and responsibility. Every organization in IBM had there was a market. There's a known market range of what roles like this in the market are paid. And this also helped with inequities between men and women to say it doesn't matter. You're in this range and your skill set and your experience level and where you are in this organization, here is your market range. Now, we'd have people that come in from the outside. By the way, this is if you're a leader that's hired during the COVID years, you more than likely paid more for talent than you might normally have done. So you might have some inequities in the pay structure that you may have to explain if you get into this. But what IBM did was they said, here's your market range. And so when I would give somebody review their compensation with them, they would be in the range. And nobody everybody wanted to make more. And everybody thought they weren't paid enough. But I would say in the market range, you are 75% of market range for your title, which means there's room in there for you to get a raise. And so here's your progression. Here's how you would do that. I had people that I would say you're 110% of market range, and so I'm giving you a small raise because technically you're overpaid. That's a hard thing to say to someone, but nobody could. I was very transparent to say, here's how we determine what we pay in this organization. And now people could say, well, I think I can make more somewhere else. I urge you to go try, but you're not. I mean, this is what we've done, the research, and that's what the strategy and the compensation strategy was, to know that it wasn't something we just made up, and now everybody's paid differently. We have an organization that just they decided on their own to make minimum wage for their organization $15. They're not required to do that. They just did. But then they had to look at, well, what about everybody that's been here for a long time that has worked their way up to maybe over the years to getting to $15.50 or $15.75 an hour? And now everybody that comes in just boom, all the way to 15. Do you have a strategy? How transparent are going to be about the rest of the people that have been here? You have to have a strategy for do that. So do people know where they are, how it's measured, what the progression is to go to the next level? And I think then becoming transparent is just, this is it. It's on the table. We don't share the actual salaries of people, but here's how you were paid.
Yeah.
And I saw some organizations that do share all the salaries. They just, from the top to the bottom, here it is. And they put it out. And I thought, that could cause some problems, but it's also erases a lot of questions. Like you said, the wonder.
Yeah, the wonder gap. I have a client of ours that works for a big organization, and similar to what you're talking about, there's a scale. They have a strategy. Now, the negative side of that is, to your point, when people come in new, they can jump a ceiling that maybe people have been there for a long time. Mm-hmm. And the frustrating part about it, because the organization is a big old, boat, and it takes a lot to move it, they have to go elsewhere and then re-enter into the organization to be able, right? So, I mean, it is complicated.
So the best way to get a raise is to quit and come back.
Quit and come back. So they're loudly quitting and quietly trying to come back, right, with all those phrases. So, but what I love about this is if you have a strategy, it increases transparency, and that your team, your people, they're comfortable understanding kind of where they're at and the salary range and the potential. But also, what I love about this is that if there's a strategy, you can also talk about what would it take to get you to that next level, that next number of, salary range. Could it be additional certifications that we would love to, by the way, pay for you to go through, or additional training, whatever it might be within their company? That's got to be part of the strategy as well, versus just saying, no, this is it, this is where we're at. But this is also how you can then grow your compensation or your benefit package.
I was wondering, going away from the salary conversation, but just back to general transparency, is your thoughts about how to become more transparent? Is it some people just aren't comfortable with sharing things with people, not knowing what they're going to do with it? But I wonder if you, and your growth as a leader, how have you? And I'm trying to surprise anything here, but just how do you get more transparent? Just go start small, or what would you coach a leader if they wanted to grow their transparency with their team?
Yeah, I like your idea.
That fine line.
Yeah, I like your idea of starting small. But here's what I do ultimately. We talk about from leadership that, hey, everybody deserves to be led well. Mm-hmm. That's what we believe here at Maxwell Leadership. And if you need to lead everyone a little bit differently, we know that. However, when it comes to something like this and transparency, this is the question I ask myself. Would I want to know this if I was on my team? Almost kind of removing myself from the leadership role, sitting in my team meetings going, what would I want to know? What should I know? What should I share? And then I just trust my gut and trust my instinct, and I'll write that down. And then when I'm with my team, or I'm one-on-one with somebody, I go, hey, I just want to kind of share this with you. And I do it. And so I just kind of try to put the hat on as if I was sitting on the other side. what I want to know that information.
I think that's good, and I know I need to get you to wrap up, but I think you can be perceived as holding back from people. You can be perceived as only telling people, the minimum, and that you know more and they don't. And there's some things that's appropriate, but in general cases, most people understand that you can't share everything. They just want you to know that you're being open with me.
Yeah.
That'll increase my engagement, my buy-in, my participation with you. I want to be rowing in that boat with you and know that you'll let me know. I know that you're that kind of leader that you'll tell me. So
yeah, as a leader, you don't want to be where your team feels like that you're keeping secrets from them. And I think that your authenticity and your vulnerability will open the doors for additional communication and conversation, and also increases trust, which is kind of how you started this whole thing, right? And trust is the currency to all influence, which we believe leadership is influence. And so you need to make sure that your team does trust you. The other thing I want to encourage you to, you say, man, this feels so level 2-ish, right? In our words of 5 levels of leadership, which Perry and I kind of naturally gravitate to, where you connect with and you lead your people. But I promise you that if you're more transparent, you will drive higher performance, higher production out of your people. Again, back to my comment about you're creating a rallying cry for them. And I think, remember this, ultimately, if your team's not performing, leader, you may not have a job. You may not be worried about. And so ultimately, isn't it interesting that on the back end of being transparent, if you're not, it may ultimately come to your team not performing, and that is going to be your responsibility. So start small. What would you want to know on the other side of you? What does it look like to be on the other side of your leadership when it comes to communication and transparency? And then trust your instinct and do that.
Chris, what has it been? 20 plus years that you and I have been in this environment. And we've talked about growth, I guess, every way that we can. And yet today, it's just as relevant in your 20 plus years of tenure, executive on our team, running the nation, running around the nation, speaking, and yet you're still growing. I know that about you, and I'm the same way. I've just been challenged. Even most recently, I've been challenged to grow significantly. And so, hey, I never get tired of this subject, and I never get tired of this subject talking to it with John, 75 years young.
Still doing it.
Still doing it. Never get tired of working alongside of people like you that's still doing it. So, man, I'm excited.
Yeah, when I found out that this was the topic we were going to talk about, I was like, this is so appropriate because I don't know where I would be today if I didn't work in an environment. I know you would say the same thing. And then to be modeled by John, it's not you're on the road with John. You guys are at different conferences, speakers, and meetings. And without a doubt, I always see him taking notes. Then you get in the car and you're like, man, here's what I learned. What did you learn? You better be ready to answer that question because he just models that. And he's kind of given that to us. So much so that I brought this for those that are watching on YouTube.
I love it.
Okay, this is a little show and tell.
I love it.
I did it yesterday too in our leadership team meeting. I'm in a show and tell mode. We're going back to elementary school.
I like it.
But that's all right. So much so that as you helped us cast vision and come up with our mission and what's important in our organization, and we do believe that everybody deserves to be led well. Obviously, you wanted people first. We get that. That's 100% us. The second one we have on our card, and every single one of our team members have this, is it is about growth. And on there, it talks about we invest in growth every day. Doesn't matter whether you're 18, 19, 20, when you and I began to think about what that looked like, or even now, and I won't mention our age as we get into this, but we also believe that it happens daily, not in a day. And what I love about that is that John says if we want things to get better, then we've got to go after it on a daily basis. Now, I'm going to take you down a little bit, if you don't mind. I want to take you down a little bit of a different path than maybe normal. I want to go away from the notes for a minute, and we're going to come back. And we've heard John talk about everything worthwhile is uphill.
Yep.
And man, growth can be an uphill battle. It doesn't often happen when we're going downhill and things are good. And I want to talk a little bit. I want to kind of lift the curtain on some things that you've been growing personally. And I think it's so appropriate because you were so intentional behind this. And it started. I think growth happens in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You can observe it and learn. You can teach and learn. You can get feedback and learn. Matter of fact, I was on a call today with one of the organizations that we work with, and it was Matt McLean with Wealth Advisors. Let me just read this real quick to you. It says, man, feedback is a gift. It's where you grow. When given by the right person in the right manner and received in the right way. And I thought, oh, that's so good. Tell me that again. I'm going to be with Mark later, and I want to share this with him. Received in the right way. Here's where I'm going. You started a journey intentionally the fourth quarter of last year.
Yep.
We called it the family rooms. And Mark set the stage, and you said, hey, family rooms sometimes get uncomfortable. I want feedback. And that began a growth journey that I haven't seen in you in a long time, and we're going to unpack that just a minute. But what I want you to do is I want you to take us back. And what was the intentionality behind saying, man, I want feedback. I want these family room conversations. I want to grow. I want us as an organization and a culture to grow. Talk to us a little bit about that to set the stage of now what you're doing, and we'll talk about that in just a minute.
Well, I started getting a little bit of feedback from teammates, and I started getting feedback from key relationships like our thought leaders that perhaps our culture was missing a beat or was missing a little bit of something. Come to find out, it was we were saying more than what we were doing. We were not completely matched up in our actions. So it started there, and then that caused me to go, I've got a problem in the organization. What is our problem? What is that? And this is not at all a negative thing. This is very powerful and positive as we unpack this, I'm sure. But I went to John, and I did something that I do all the time with John. I state the problem. I see if we have agreement on our problem. And then I'm always prepared with 3 suggestions to remedy the problem and then a recommendation. Here's 3 suggestions, John, but here's my recommendation. And John and I just have this formula for how we have led him, the visionary, the owner, and me, the CEO, the implementer of his vision. Well, that has changed a little bit, but John's mentoring in my life has not changed. We still have that same formula. Yeah. So I went to John. I said, here's my problem. And what was interesting, and I won't dig into this because that's not the subject today, John didn't agree with me. Now, we beat it up for about 10 hours of playing time. John, this is why I think this is the problem. Yeah, I think it is the problem. No, it's not the problem, Mark. No, it's not. And finally, after he had listened to me long enough, which was about 10 hours, he identified the real problem. And the real problem was that I needed to roll up the sleeves and get engaged in the lifeblood, in the culture, in the day-to-day rigor of our organization. Yeah. And so that started it. And so the best way I knew to do that as a conclusion to John and I saying, I've got to roll up the sleeves and get involved in what's going on in the organization, were these family rooms. Chris, you were a part of them. Yeah. And in fact, you were a part of the very first one. I remember this. I had, they were about 12 or 13 of them. You
dedicated a lot of time to it.
And in those family rooms, Chris, a real reoccurring challenge, opportunity to really address things in the organization began to bubble up. And it was that. Then we've had a lot of leadership meetings with that. I've validated that, verified that with the leadership team. But it all started with a realization, hey, I think I have a problem. Then it went to the next step, John and I agreeing on the problem in the organization, and then we're beginning to be intentional about fixing it.
And I love the fact that John says the only guarantee that it's going to get better from what you heard, you accepted that feedback. And the hearts were pure. You received it the right way. And John says the only way it's going to get better is if we grow. And you got to do that. So I'm going to go out of order a little bit here. John gave us an incredible growth plan here. And I'm going to go a little bit out of order because I know the process that you went through to do this. The first thing that you did was you said, I'm going to go and I'm going to reflect on what I heard. And you do this every year. The timing of this happened to be pivotal this year for you, but you spent, John mentioned at least 1 hour a week. I think you accomplished a year-long process of that in probably just about 3 days. Talk about then what you heard, what you learned as you're growing through this, and the reflection and how powerful that was and allowed you to come out of that with a tremendous growth plan that we'll talk about after that.
Yeah, so before the growth plan, it started with I read a book, I think I have recommended on the podcast, Chris. It's by Gary Keller, which is one of the founders of Keller Williams. Yeah. Gary Keller wrote a book called The One Thing. And he talks about how that leaders need to synthesize down to that one thing they need to be focused on, and then they need to spend the best part of their day in that. For me, the best part of the day is the morning. So immediately coming out of family rooms, Chris, you'll remember this, I carved out and canceled everything that I did every morning of the week because I had identified 5 things that needed my undivided attention. 5 things in our organization. And I came out of that family room. I had already carved out every morning was going to be focused on my one thing. And I started focusing for 4 solid weeks, 4 hours a day on one thing in the morning for 4 hours on what I could do from a creativity and from a problem-solving perspective that I could begin focusing on in the organization. So it really started there way before the growth plan that we'll get to. I started really assessing with a clear mind, with an undistracted attention, and then with as much creativity that I could muster in a one-on-one, one-to-myself environment. Yeah. I began working through how do I creatively go after these 5 areas.
So you go through that, and then you make up your mind, I am going to intentionally grow. Now, talk a little bit about the next steps for you. So John says, hey, we're going to make a commitment. So you did the reflection. You're making a commitment. Now, for you, that growth looked like many different things. Mentors, books. You're just absorbing content, and you are committed. Talk about where your mind went when you said, I know I need to grow, and I'm going to absorb as much content as I possibly can. What led you down the path of saying, what resources? How do I tap into this? What does that look like? Let our listeners hear from that, because I think each one of us have challenges like that in our life, and sometimes we don't know how to go about the process, but you've lived out and modeled this, and John's given us his plan, and it's in direct alignment with that.
Yeah, well, one is if you can synthesize down what the real problem is, and you can synthesize it down to as much simplicity as possible, you're going to then be able to build the best comprehensive focused plan available. We distilled it down to we had a momentum challenge. You're part of the organization last year. Congratulations on Podcast Land. What was it, 46% growth last year. This guy right here that you're seeing, if you're watching YouTube, this guy grew 47%. But now let me say that. What was interesting is I still could come back and say our common problem was momentum.
Correct.
That was with some parts of our organization having best years ever, some teammates having personal best years ever. We still had a momentum problem to what? To the vision that unified us all together. So if you can come up with a common root to the problem, because that'll establish common language when you begin to build this intentionality around a plan. So the problem, and then figure out a way to unify everybody to the same problem. That was a dance. That was a challenge because I got some people sitting across from me that killed it last year, and I had some people on his team that had personal best, and then I had other teammates that we just were not out of the starting blocks yet. So how do I unify everybody on we have a momentum problem? So synthesize it to as much simplicity as possible. Yeah, that's why we have a word for the year. You have a word for the year. I heard what it was. I've got one. My whole growth plan is around that. Well, the plan to get the organization on the track that it needed that kind of simplicity too. What's the word and how does that word apply to everybody? Because if you can get that word to a simplest form and then you can get everybody seeing their way to embrace the word from how it will help them, now we're on a track to begin to build that plan.
Yeah, it became our rallying cries. In essence, is what you were doing. No matter where each vertical or team was doing, it didn't matter. As a whole, as a team, that became our rallying cry together. So you and I've heard you say simplify a ton of times in the last 90 days. So you simplified the problem, and you go, okay, now I got to grow in that area.
Yep.
Talk to us a little bit about what you had. And remember, we're trying to keep this podcast under 3 hours.
Yes,
and
exactly.
So, but I know how intentional you were about that and the amount of resources you consumed. Talk about that process.
I'm privileged to have a weekly call with a bunch of leader-minded people. So I ask about 4 people that I really believe could help me in the area of momentum. I said, what do you recommend that I read? What do you recommend that I consume? Got some great feedback. Then I went to my call to hundreds of people and I said, hey, if you got a book or a recommendation on momentum, let me have it. And I just took all of that, assimilated. There was a lot of redundancy. People recommended the same thing. Then that became at the top of my list.
Yeah.
And so I have been, in fact, yesterday in a leadership meeting that you and I were in, somebody brought me another book on momentum. And I'm just consuming that and digesting it. So going back to my 4 hours in the day, I would spend 2 hours reading a book on the subject matter that I had before I even started my 4-hour day. And again, all that comes back to get people to give you input from their perspective with the clarity and the simplicity that you're going to lead the team. Do the clarity and simplicity on what you're going to grow into. And like you said, I cannot remember, but one other time maybe that I have been this diligent in being a sponge on content on one piece of subject matter. I have read and consumed. You see it every time I come into a leadership meeting. I give you a new tidbit that I have read to give us common language on what we're going to do.
Yeah. And what I've also seen, and I haven't mentioned this to you, but I watched you walk the fourth quarter and then through the end of the year and the reflection, and there's some discouragement there, certain things, right? All of us have discouragement areas of our life that we wish we grew in, right? But what's been fascinating for me to see, and again, this will be the first time you kind of hearing this out of my mouth, which is when I saw you prioritize that, and I mentioned to you yesterday, this can be so good for the company, but it's been so good for you as a leader because when you prioritize that and this growth and the intentionality of growth that John's talking about here, you become, happier might be a little bit of a soft word, but you become stronger, you become more confident, you almost become more resilient to that uphill battle that we're taking. And what I love about it is you absolutely, John's second point in the plan is you make that commitment public.
Yeah.
And you do that. You talk about it. We're talking about it on the podcast.
Yep.
But more importantly, you share that with specifically our leadership team every time you come in there. And John says early on in the lesson, what are you doing to develop yourself and others? Yeah. And I know that we are growing. I've read more books, not than you have, but that I did in the first couple weeks of last year because of the challenge that you're putting out with us. What's the intentionality behind sharing not only what you're learning, but sharing what you're consuming and how you're doing it with your team?
Three reasons, Chris, that comes to mind immediately. And like Chris said, this was not scripted or prepared, but 3 reasons. One is accountability. I always grow better on a personal level or at a team level because you, like you said, I wrote that down too, John. How are you growing personally? How are you growing your team? I want to put it out there that I want my team, our team, to know that I'm growing. And I'm putting it out there. These are the books I'm reading. And then I come and show you what I'm reading with things that we're doing. That's accountability. The second reason is common language. I want people to know what is driving the intentionality around my leadership right now. What's happening is you're picking up some of those books. Others 100%. Are picking up that book. So the common language is now not only rallying us to the vision and the direction I want to take the organization, it's rallying all of us in how we all are growing. You're growing. Yesterday's leadership meeting, and again, this is just family talk, which I love this podcast, by the way. Yeah. Yesterday, the way we complimented one another was staggering to me. I don't think we've ever complimented one another as much as we did yesterday in that meeting. And I could tell you're reading the books. Ben, you were talking about some of the practices and principles that we're using in the first person. Hey, we've got to. And I went, you go, Chris. I don't even have to say it because it's being repeated. But that brings me to the third thing. When you start saying what the common language is and you start holding yourself accountable, now you start giving expectation of why we're doing this, the desired outcome.
That's good.
And so we're in the middle of a process right now that's driving a little bit, me, maybe you too, a little bit crazy because I'm ready to act and we're still in the information gathering.
Meeting.
Yeah,
matter of fact, I got home last night. My wife's like, well, how many steps you had today? I was like, I refuse to report. She's like,
because it was all sitting.
We're going on a walk, right? Because I've been with Mark in meetings all day trying to figure this out, right? But you got to do that. You got to figure
and that's going to drive that common set of outcomes that you're wanting. So it's all based on intentionality.
Yeah, I love that. So again, John's second point was you're making it public. We're talking about it to our team. We're talking about it to the enterprise. We're talking about it to you here today. John's last point is you're going to share what you're learning, which you're doing. I want you to close on this thought of growth. You and I could talk about this because we are the product, right? We've been doing it for a long time. It's what we believe in, and we've seen the growth. John mentioned something I think is really important in here. He's like, hey, start off by saying, what's one area of growth of choice? And then what's one area of skill? And you every year come out of your time and your reflection with, yes, a word of the year, but you also, being a person of faith, have a choice that you make of what you're going to study this year from a growth standpoint, tie it to leadership, tie it to your growth, whatever. And then you also have a skill set. Talk a little bit about the power of having both of those, how you come to them in your growth journey, and then what that looks like.
Yeah, so for me, the word for the year is kind of the focus. It's kind of the aspiration, the idea. The skill set comes in what I set with rigor. I have in my growth plan, I have daily, weekly, and monthly rhythms, things that I've got to deliver every day, every week, every month, to complement the word, the concept.
Got it.
And so I think what I feel like John's talking about here is if you don't have skill sets to go along with the strengths, if you don't have rigors and disciplines to go along with the word, then it's going to sound nice, but you're not going to see that tangible momentum.
Yeah.
And that's what I have found. The people that are the most effective today, people that are listening and viewing this podcast, you're writing it down. I'm proud of you. Congratulations. I'd give you a standing ovation if I could. But it's the people that get an action item, something that is a skill, something that is a discipline that's going to bring the greatest amount of results after a conversation like this. I hope that between John, Chris, or myself, we've given you a note to capture. Yeah. And I'm sure we have because John has.
John
so we're
us.
good.
Yeah.
But what I hope just as much, not more than, but just as much, is you put a skill, a challenge, an application to it that will make you effective. I do a year-end review every year. I'm reading a lot of books on momentum, but I'm telling you, it's these meetings that we're having that is making that more powerful.
Yeah.
The idea, the concept, the discipline without the skill application would render it useless, I would contend. Maybe a little bit of useful, but I'm going to tell you, learning without application is not growth.
Yeah. Remind us again, how many years you been with John?
23.
23 years. And you would admit, and you did, and I would absolutely back you up on this, the last 90 days, the greatest growth you've had. 23 years with the greatest leadership organization and leader that you and I know, and yet you're still growing at a pace. Like, that's what we should strive to do. That's what makes things better. As we wrap, one little question on this. You spend all this intentionality. You build this growth plan. How often do you review it? How often do you go and check it? How often do you hold yourself accountable to it? Because what I want our listeners to do is I want them to develop a growth plan, because we want them. We know what's on the other side of that. It doesn't always get easier. Sometimes it gets even harder. But man, we want that for you, because everybody deserves to be led well, and we want to add value to you. And this is the best way. And John talked about, this is where he started. This is where you need to start. You can be intentional about it, and you can develop that. And then maybe never look at it again, and kind of, how often do you, that rigor that you developed and you try to follow, as you wrap up, how often do you check that and hold yourself accountable to it and adjust it, or maybe just check the box?
So in the first 60 days of a year, I'm reviewing it every day. I reviewed it this morning. I'll review it tomorrow morning. I'll review it Saturday. I'll review it Sunday.
Got it.
I'm reviewing it every day. It's got to get in me for it to drive behaviors, to cultivate skill sets like we talked about, to develop habits.
Yeah.
So it's an everyday rigor that I will do every year for the first 60 days. I'm reading it every day. I'm familiarizing myself. Then it pairs back probably to once a week. And then by the third and fourth quarter, it is probably twice a month that I'm pulling it out and reviewing and reflecting. One of the disciplines that I have is in a year-end review this year. Some years it's monthly, some years it's bi-monthly, some years it's quarterly. I will go and assess and tweak the plan based on the effectiveness the plan has had then, so that plan that I got in one setting is a living, breathing organism that makes sense. I'll tell you a couple of things that I want to do to wrap today. that I feel really strong about. There's two things that I want to challenge you to do personally, because I'm so passionate about personal growth. And it's only the what is this? The 18th of the month. It's really, if you're listening to it live, some of you will listen to it. We're only 18 days into this year, and I want to challenge you to get really intentional.
So I'm going to do a series of teachings on influence. Okay, I want to start this series off by sharing with you what I've taught for 40 years now. And that is leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And so when people want to become a better leader, I tell them to become a better influencer. And if you can expand your influence, if you can influence more people and you can influence people in a deeper way, in other words, if you can go, deep and wide with your influence, then it's going to be pretty amazing. So I was having a conversation with my friend Chris Hodges. And he said, John, I just did a teaching that was very effective. In fact, he did it at Highlands College at their graduation. And he said, I talked about the 5 people in my life that influenced me to the greatest extent. And I wanted the kids to hear that. I wanted them to know why I was what I was and how I became who I became by these people that had great influence in my life. And he said it was a very effective teaching to the kids. Basically, you're going to go through life, you're going to be influencing others, but who's influenced you? And so we had this wonderful dinner conversation, as Chris and I have many times. And I loved the idea. And I looked at him that day and I said, well, you know what? I need to do that myself. I need to look at the people who have greatly influenced my life. And what did it mean to my life? And what did I learn from that influence? So I got my list. In fact, I got it right here on my iPhone. And what I'm going to do for the next 10 lessons is I'm going to talk to you about the influencers, the top 10 influencers in my life, and what they influenced me in, and what an effect that had on a positive way for me. So we're going to have a wonderful kind of long 10-week series after this introduction on the subject of influence. It's a great subject, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. And I'm going to encourage you, as I share with you who influenced me, you start making your list, just like Chris encouraged me to make mine. So I'm glad you're with me today on Minute with Maxwell. Leaders cause something to happen. This is how you know you found a leader. Again, in the 17 indisputable laws of teamwork, one of the laws is the law of the catalyst. The law of the catalyst says winning teams have players who make things happen. You see, games are won by get it done and then some people. That's just what they are. So leaders have the ability to stir, to cause. In the Leadership Challenge book, they enable people to act. They cause things to happen. And what do leaders cause? Number one, they cause momentum. They have the ability to get momentum going. Warren Buffett said it's not how hard you row the boat, it's how fast the stream is going. There are 4 types of people in an organization in the area of momentum. There are momentum fakers. You ever know a momentum faker? They think noise makes it happen. So they're all rah, 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 rah. I mean, they just drive you nuts after a while. You just want to get in a room and lock the door and be by yourself, okay? Or have them take a pill, one of the two. But they're momentum fakers. They just think of the noise will do it. So they just kind of get hyped, I guess. Then there are what I call momentum breakers. Momentum breakers. They think their middle name is damn. They're always trying to stop something. They're always plugging it up. They're just like a dam. You know what I mean? They can keep any moving object still for a while. And then there are what I call momentum takers. They don't think, they just take. You just get momentum going, they just come and suck life out of you. You know what I'm saying? They're the kind of person you just groan when you see them coming down the hallway. You know what I mean? How many of you know somebody you just groan when you see them coming? You say, oh, no, it's... But then there's this last class of people. They're leaders. They're momentum makers. And they're the leaders who make things happen. By the way, when you're trying to find a potential leader, when you're looking around at eaglets, looking for an eagle, always go to the person who has the ability to make things happen. You just throw them out there and they always come back. I mean, they always bring home the bacon. You know what I'm talking about? Instead of belching out the bologna, they just bring home the bacon. They just bring it back. They just, every time you just throw them out there, doesn't matter. They come back and they win. They just come out on top. You just say, wow, how did they pull that off? You ask them, they don't even know how they pulled it off. Or they won't even tell you how they pulled it off. Cops may, but they won't, okay? And don't you also know other people? You can set them up perfectly and they can't pull it off. I mean, you can just set it up and they just come back with 17 reasons why they couldn't, shouldn't, didn't, and won't. Okay? Okay, 4 types of people: momentum fakers, breakers, takers, and makers. Now, leaders not only cause momentum, in other words, leaders are like thermostats, not thermometers. They determine the temperature, not record it. Leaders also cause change. They have the ability to cause change. Leaders either cause change or they stop change. Now, hang on. If you'd have heard me 20 years ago, if you'd have heard me 15 years ago, one of the things I would have told you is this. Wrong, but I would have told you this. I'm just a wonderful, passionate, sometimes very naive, stupid person. I would have told you 15 years ago, I'd have said, now, here's the way this works. Leaders love change and followers hate change. That's not true. Can I tell you something? Leaders hate change as much as followers, unless the change is their idea. In fact, I want to make a statement to you that's really huge. Leaders resist change more than followers if it's not their idea. Because leaders many times say, how's this going to threaten my kingdom? How's this going to mess up my turf? So just because you're a leader doesn't mean you're pro-change, and if you're a follower, you're anti-change. No. So what you've got to do is make sure that those motives are right and you got the teamwork going right so that you don't have people sabotaging your organization just because they want to somehow protect their turf. If the pace of change inside your organization is not faster than the pace of change outside your organization, then your organization has a very short lifespan. Leaders cause one more thing. Leaders not only cause momentum, and leaders not only cause change, but thirdly and finally, leaders cause growth. Whenever you see a leader, the people around them, the organization is growing. That's just the way it works. The quote's a great quote. Those who are successful are those who have known more than the average person considers necessary. Leaders are always growing, and because they're always growing, their organizations are always growing. So 3 growth statements. Letter A, leaders continue to lead if they continue to grow. B, the pace of the leader determines the pace of the people. And C, growth is not automatic. Are you taking this material, are you taking this stuff and are you fleshing it out in your company? Are you passing it on to people? Are you using it for yourself and then are you stopping it there, or are you using it for others? You see, we're to be a river, not a reservoir. So let it flow, let it flow. Therefore, because you keep growing, we always are going to have answers to questions people are asking. We're always going to be add value to people that are hurting. See, you cannot give what you do not have. And one of the saddest things in life, my dad, when I was 17 years of age, he said, John, listen to me very carefully. He said, you got to read every day. You got to listen to tapes every day. You got to get around growing people every day. Because he said, let me tell you what the saddest thing I know in life is for somebody to get up at 60 years of age and open their mouth and have nothing to say. He said, constantly make sure that you've got something to say. And the only insurance that you've got something to say is the fact that you keep growing, that you keep developing, that you keep improving. Because here's what I know about leaders. They cause growth around them. Thank you very much.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.